after being built up like that. It reminds me in 2006 during the All-Ireland final, and there was about 6 minutes to go, and we were playing Kilkenny, who at that time was starting to become the greatest hurling team of all time. And I think we were about 7 points down, and Joe Cunningham came up to the subs bench and he says, "Cusack, you're going on there." He said, "Well, we need a few goals to win the match," and I think I felt less pressure then than I do feel now after the build-up from Angela. I'm always very conscious when I speak at these events that if you're looking for somebody who's a pillar of society, who's an example of kindness and compassion, then I can assure you that it's certainly not me. I come from a place called Cloyne, and it's 4 streets, and where the streets intersect, it's what we call the cross. And that's where the lads that aren't too interested in work gather each day for a state of the nation and solve the problems of the world. And I can assure you they can tell you plenty of stories about me that would reinforce that I'm the furthest thing from an angel that you could imagine. Can I just say, and maybe this isn't the proper language to use, but for me, this is bloody awesome. Because for a guy who 20 years ago had immense emotional difficulties and distress in my life, as a teenager and in my early 20s, life-threatening emotional distress, and in a country and a school system where those things were cloaked in silence. And I was convinced that I was the only person in the world that was experiencing the things that were going on for me. 20 years later, to be here with the most important professional body that we have in the country, and we're talking about the area of emotional well-being, well, it's bloody awesome. And when myself and Geraldine and Angela and Sean and the rest of the people in the IPPN sat down last February or March, and we asked ourselves the question, how could we build on the phenomenal response that was there to the teaching councils failed, the panel discussion that we were part of there, and the IPPN conference here last year, again where there was a phenomenal response from the teaching population, and was validation for us that there's an immense hunger in the teaching population for discussion and debate in this area. We couldn't have imagined the response that we got. And we're really, really, really grateful to all of you, all of the different educational departments, and all of you teachers and principals and staff for being here today. So I can't emphasize that enough. A friend of mine rang me a number of months ago, and he told me about a colleague of his, a young woman called Susan, and he said that she was, to use his words, in a deep depression and suffering from an eating disorder, and she had requested that I might go and speak with her. And I get asked that quite a lot. And I'm always I'm very aware of the things that I can and I can't do when I have those conversations. I'm not a therapist or a counsellor, but what I am is I am a human being. And like every human being, I have endless amounts of reservoirs of empathy and compassion. It's a fundamental human thing that we all possess. When you meet these, not everybody needs professional help. Sometimes people just need a story to be heard. Maya Angelou, the American poet, says, "There's no greater agony than the bearing of an untold story within you." So what I can do is, I can sit and listen and be with that person and be perhaps a witness to their story if that's what emerges. And never ever underestimate how desperate a person that's in distress wants to be able to share their story. And so along with listening to the person, I can offer to walk beside them on their journey to healing as a fellow human being, a kindred spirit. So I agreed to meet this young woman, Susan, in a public park, and it was very obvious that she was very underweight. And we sat and we spoke, and she told me how she'd been through school, and she'd been very aggressive in school, and a number of different things that had gone on for her. But a question posed in a tone of compassionate curiosity, where there isn't a demand for an answer, but that there's an invitation for a response. This question asked at the right time can allow a fortress of defenses that a person has built up to collapse. So I asked this young woman, I said, "Is there any question that you would like me to ask, that you've never been asked in your life?" And she looked at me and she took a deep breath. And she said, "Ask me what happened to me when I was 10 years of age." And so I did. And she started to cry. And then she started to sob heavily. And it was obvious, and I have this experience a lot with some people, it was obvious these were tears that were coming from a very, very deep place that she had buried for a long time, and that these tears, had been consistently hungering towards expression, but she hadn't had the opportunity to do it. And she sobbed heavily for 15 minutes, I would say, and the normal, or maybe a human response might be to put your hand on the person or try to console them, and very often that's you not being comfortable with sitting with a person's pain. So very often it's best just to leave them sob away. And when she finished, she told me of how, at 10 years of age, an uncle of hers, who was a pillar of society, had sexually abused her. And she had nobody that she could speak to about this, because her uncle, as I say, was that pillar of society. And she tried to mention it one time to her mother, but she was quickly told to keep it quiet. So suddenly, Susan's aggressive behaviour and her difficulty with food started to make absolutely complete sense. The Sufi poet Hafiz wrote 2,500 years ago, "Jump to your feet, wave your fists, threaten and warn the world that your heart can no longer live without real and authentic love." This young woman's aggressive behaviour was her way of trying to alert the adults in her environment to the stress that she was experiencing. But nobody did, because we consistently see the outer behaviours, but we consistently fail as well to understand the hidden layers of meaning behind them. When these outer behaviours' true purpose were not acknowledged by the adults in her environment, she turned her behaviour inward. Her starving of herself was again her non-verbal way of trying to communicate to people how she'd been starved as love as a young person. And that love that Hafiz spoke about. We keep trying to change people's behaviours without a full understanding of how and why they arise. That young woman didn't have a biological disorder, no more than many of the other disorders that we're continually labelling our people with in this country. Why is it that the number of apparent mental disorders has expanded from 106 in 1952 to 374 today, without any solid scientific evidence to back it up? And there's few questions asked about this, either as ourselves or in the media. Is the reason that we are so quick to label human beings because it narrows the problem down to the person and abdicates us as a society from our responsibilities? Why are psychiatric drugs now more widely prescribed than any other medical drug in the history of the world? Are the challenging behaviours that our students and teachers and principals engaging in holding a mirror up to society and reflecting an image that perhaps we don't want to see? That the society that we as individuals have participated in creating, instead of being a force for human and social development and progress, is instead going against the core evolutionary requirements needed to create and maintain our personal growth and social well-being. When I was a young student, I worked for Doreen Allen, the famous chef, an incredible woman, absolutely incredible woman. Break your heart. You could weed 1,000 weeds, and she'd come along, she'd spot the one weed that you didn't get. But an unbelievable woman when it comes to teaching you certain skills and qualities and loyalty to staff that goes well beyond the call of duty. But, when we were working in the glass houses, if we wanted to grow, some vegetables or something beautiful like a flower, we knew that we had to create the conditions and climate that would allow whatever seed it was that we planted to grow and thrive. Now, for some reason, if that didn't happen, the first question that we asked ourselves was, what was wrong with the climate? Was there not enough sunlight? Do we not give it enough water? Do we not weed it enough? And invariably the issues would be found. But the last question that we asked would be, was there potentially something wrong with the seed? But when our human beings, when our children and our teachers and principals and adults engage in challenging behaviours, what's the first question that we ask? What's the problem with them? It's like the lotto ad. It's you. It is. We never ask about the climate, maybe seldom that we ask about the climate and the environment that they exist in. And then we might be very quick to put a label on a person, and we might even medicate them to emotionally anaesthetise them. An interesting case study. Why is it that in the United States of America, nearly 10% of children, school-going children, are diagnosed with ADHD, and are taking pharmaceutical medications, whereas in France, the percentage is less than 0.5%. Why is that? Well, in America, child psychiatrists consider ADHD to be a biological disorder with biological causes, and the treatment is therefore psychostimulant medications. French psychiatrists, on the other hand, view ADHD as a medical condition that is biopsychosocial in its origins. Instead of treating kids with drugs, they look at the underlying issues that are causing young people's distress, not in their brains, but in their social contexts. Through psychotherapy and other forms of counselling, they work with schools and families and other community organisations to identify where the issues are. They don't use the DSM that many people in Europe use, the diagnostic statistical manual that's normally used, but they created their own classification system, whose focus is on identifying and addressing the underlying psychosocial causes of children's symptoms, not on finding the best pharmacological band-aids with which to mask their symptoms. Now, this is not about blame. And one of the questions I think it's important for us to ask is, can the possibility exist for us that we can accept responsibility for the climate and the culture and the environments that we've created without taking on the useless baggage of guilt or blame? You know, I have many regrets when I think back to the time when I first started coaching underage teams in Climb when I was a young man myself. You know, at that time, at 17 years of age, I had an incredibly poor sense of myself, incredibly low self-esteem. A huge part of my identity was tied up with my sports and my studies. As long as I was succeeding in both of those things, I felt valued and worthy as a human person. My self-opinion was defined by the opinions of other people. And it was through that prism that I viewed the players that I was coaching down that field. I praised their successes and criticised their failures and confused their unique presence with their behaviours in the sports field. Instead of hurling being this wonderful opportunity for them to express and develop both as a player and a person, the environment that I created meant that they had a fear of failure and an addiction to success. And the hurling became a means for them to prove their worth and to be seen and valued by the coach. The learning and success came before loving. And then for me, I had what many people might term a breakdown, but ultimately for me was a breakthrough. 10 years of bullying and panic attacks and self-harming, where I would find any implement I could to cut myself, my arms, my legs, my chest, to give out of physical expression to the immense inner suffering that I was enduring, and engulfed in this omnipresent darkness that permeated every part of my being. It all combined to a crescendo to where I collapsed inside my workplace one day. And I was unfortunate that at that time, I was put through the Irish psychiatric system, an experience that was cold and dehumanizing, where I was spoken to and not with, and where little and no authentic listening occurred. You know, it's much easier to sit and to give a prescription to somebody than it is to sit and be with them and try and understand their story. And, you know, psychiatrists put an intellectually sounding label on me that justified their profession, but that did little to give validity to my story or to the wisdom of my stories, or to reflect the vastness and expansiveness that exists inside me as a human being. And I was fueled with medication to the point that at times I didn't know whether I had day or night. And then I was unbelievably fortunate, very much so because of a favour that Doreen Allen done for me, to put me in contact with a psychotherapist, where a safe space for the first time in my life was created to explore and find meaning in the darkness that was engulfing my inner landscape. You know, when a person is allowed to express their deepest feelings in the secure knowledge that they won't be rejected, that they won't be judged or humiliated or criticised or expected to be different, then transformation and true and genuine healing can occur. But it's scary and at times painful to face one's deepest fears, anxieties and inner demons, to sit and be with painful emotions that you've tried to silence for years. The process of self-discovery is not easy. It's a journey that's full of difficult but ultimately liberating learning. And it's a journey that we as adults can't shrink from. Depression forced me down a road that I didn't want to go on, but it was the road less traveled and the one that's made all the difference in my life. Along that path, I came to appreciate my own uniqueness and value as a human being, a sense of self that was independent of my successes or failures, my sport and my studies. A journey where I was able to draw aside the veils of illusion that I created in my life and see the world anew from the solidity and sanctuary of my own real self. Where I was able to dissolve the old cages that had confined me in an unlived life, and where I was able to begin to live my life from the inside out. Now, in the last 15 years, I haven't needed any medication, haven't missed a day's work because of my experience with my depression. And this isn't a boast, it's just a reality, and it was because of the immense amount of work that I'd done myself and the support of my family and my community. And I also haven't needed any therapy. But I got a phone call last Sunday night to say that my brother was, my older brother, Donald, was finishing hurling with Klein and finishing with RT, and he was taking up a coaching role with the Clare Senior hurling team, and the shock of that very nearly put me back into therapy, I can tell you. But how you perceive yourself, how you perceive and see and feel, not thinking but feel about yourself, will determine how you see other people. So the next time I return to coaching, it was coming from a completely different place. And I meet a lot of those lads now, and several of them are playing into county hurling. When I meet them, they tell me that what they don't remember is the techniques or the tactics or the different types of skills that we educated or taught them. They tell me about how they felt at training, that they actually felt valued before the hurling ever began. And that's something that I appreciate more than a lot of things in my life. So one of the questions that we need to ask at this symposium today is, are the cultures and the environments and the climate that exist in our educational sector supporting and nourishing of the healthy development and holistic development of all aspects of the human being? Not just their intellectual selves, but their social, emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual, behavioural and creative. No more than the sea can be separated from the soil and environment it exists in. No more than the body can be separated from the mind can the student and staff be separated from their cultural environment. A poem written by Charles C. Finn in 1966, surprisingly by an Englishman. Please hear what I'm not saying. Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face that I wear, for I wear a mask. I wear 1,000 masks that I'm afraid to take off, and none of them is the real me. So don't be fooled by me. I'm good at pretending. I give the impression that I'm cool and confident, but inside it's different. I'm not in command. I'm often confused, lonely, and desperately need somebody to understand me. But I hide and I don't want anyone to know. That's why I frantically create a mask to hide behind, because I'm afraid to show the real me. I'm afraid that you will not accept me. I'm afraid that you will think less of me and laugh at me. You see, deep down, I'm afraid that I'm nothing, that I'm no good, and that if you knew me, you would reject me. So I play my game, my pretending game, and thus begins my parade of masks. My life becomes a front to protect the real me. I chatter idly to you about everything, but tell you nothing of what's going on inside me, my fears, my worries, my doubts. So when I'm talking, please listen carefully and try to hear what I'm not saying. Try to hear what I'm not saying. What I'd like to say, but I can't. I'd like to be genuine, honest, and sincere, but I cannot without your help. My trust grows very slowly, so you will have to be patient with me. Each time you are gentle and encouraging, each time you are kind, each time you try to understand, I'm given new hope and I start believing in myself in a new way. You let me see it's okay to be me. So I can take off the mask and be happy in your company. I can let you see the real me. Who am I, you may wonder? I'm someone you know very well. For I'm every man and woman and student and principal and TV personality and hurler and sportsman that you meet and greet on the street daily. How many people in here, truthfully, feel some or all of the above? Feel it seldom or often, feel it mild or strong? How many people in here rise out of bed each morning and they depart the house, put on their mask to give that outer persona to please the outer world? I think we all exist somewhere within that spectrum, because there are few of us that don't carry some amount of emotional baggage in our lives. And ultimately, we're all the sole inhabitants and silent witnesses to our own inner worlds. So only us all ultimately know the truth of that. The dream that dwells within the heart of each principal and teacher and student is to be valued and appreciated for their own unique and sacred presence. The desire to be loved unconditionally and to love. The need to belong to something outside of themselves. The craving to be authentic and to remove the masks that we each wear daily and the false images that we portray to the outer world. The aspiration to be free, to live our own lives and to live our own lives that resonates and coheres with our real selves and deepest needs. You know, my work with the Gaelic Players Association takes me all over the world, or takes me all over Ireland. And my speaking engagements take me all over Europe and America, and working and supporting organisations like the IPPN. And it amazes me that no matter where I go in the world, I never see the same person twice. You know, I look over at Pat Goff, and, you know, wherever I'll go to over the next 12 months, I'll never again encounter another man like Pat Goff. Of all the billions of people that have ever lived, and all of the billions of people that will come after, there'll never again be another Pat Goff. Now, some people might say that's a good thing, but anyhow, but the way he talks, the way he walks, the way he thinks, even the hair on his head. And if that's true for Pat Goff, then it's true for everybody else here. We're all this incredibly unique, once-off phenomenon that will never again reoccur in the universe. And I read a small bit about quantum physics, and I understand about 1% of it, but it's fascinating stuff altogether. And quantum physicists have shown now that the calcium in your bones, and the carbon in your muscles, and the iron in your blood, and the oxygen that you breathe once belonged to long-vanished stars that exploded more than 12 billion years ago. 90% of your body is made up of this. Literally, you're made of stardust. I was an altar boy for years, and priests used to talk about from dust you've come and to dust you shall return, but they're only partly right. It's stardust. So literally, I do a lot of work with Brizzy, and people say to me, geez, Brizzy, you're a star. And I say, fuck, he's not the only one. I'm a star here as well. I remember playing my first senior hurling championship match with Clyne a number of years ago. When I first was starting to read about this, I think I scored about 4 goals and 4 points. It was the highest I ever scored, and that wasn't a very common occurrence. But I can remember I was coming off the field afterwards, and this old man who was a faithful supporter of Clyne, and if you played badly, would cut the legs from under you, but if you played well, and he was waiting outside the door, and he says to me, geez, Cusack boy, he says, you're a star. And I said, you know what, Pat, you're right. I am a star. And I was about to get into that discussion with him about quantum physics, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, when we were after a few beers, we had that discussion, and it was pretty fascinating. But the question I'd ask is, though, think about it. If that's the stuff that's inside in us, how much of our inner light, our real and our authentic selves, do we express and illuminate the environments and cultures that we exist in? Because we have to explore our own darkness and our own emotional baggage before we can fully witness our own light. And no individual or society can fully understand itself without first looking at its shadow side. The future of our world is not our young people, it's adults. Kids take their cues from adults. Whatever we don't deal with in our emotional lives, we pass on to others. Our unfinished emotional business becomes theirs. A therapist once said to me that our young people are swimming in the unconsciousness of adults' behavior like fish in a sea. Now, 80% of teachers recently responded to a survey to say that they didn't feel adequately trained to deal with the emotional issues that they were facing in their classrooms. I worked in the medical device industry for 15 years, and if we brought a machine in to the plant that cost maybe €1 million, in 1,000 years an employee wouldn't be sent down to that machine to work on that machine without being adequately trained. For 3 reasons. Number 1, the machine was too costly. Number 2, you were making parts that were going into human beings. But number 3, for the well-being of that staff member, it would be totally inhumane to put him working with something that he felt he wasn't adequate to be able to deal with. But for some reason, we're accepting that for our teachers. Another question I would ask is, how much are our teachers supported to take up the mantle of reflecting on their own inner worlds and freeing themselves from their own emotional baggage? The introduction of mindfulness to the junior cycle is a welcome development, but on its own, it's not sufficient. The embedding of emotional well-being as a fundamental part of a school's ethos needs to become a consciousness. It needs to become a consciousness and not just a concept or a subject. I've read much of the literature that's been produced by all the different bodies that work in the education sector, and it's very admirable. But they talk about the relationship between the principal and the teacher and the student and parents and principals. But nowhere in the literature does it talk about the most important relationship of all, the relationship of the person with themselves. Because it's the strength of that relationship that will most determine your effectiveness and effectiveness as a teacher. Why does it have to become a fundamental part of our school system? The young Wolves, the Headstrong done a survey a couple of years ago, and I think this is a clip, a very sobering clip, that it'll be worth people just to have a look at. And we say, as somebody mentioned earlier on, that our educational system is working. And I'm not saying that education is the only part of our society, but it's a big part of it. So in any given lecture hall of 100 students, 43 students have felt that life is not worth living. 21 are self-harming. 7 have attempted to end their own life. Only 3% have sought help. 40 are suffering from depression. 38 are suffering from anxiety. 41 engage in problem drinking. 10 are alcohol dependent. These are college students. And you know, Clive, I don't know much about league tables, but I can imagine, somebody mentioned the tyranny of league tables, that it has to play a role in these figures. And these are college students. So on these league tables, these are the things that our government ministers and our policymakers are looking at and saying, yeah, this is a success on this league table that they capture. But what good is a knowledge of physics and maths and science and all of these things if these are the figures that we have in front of us here? So the message needs to ring out loud and clear from this symposium today. It needs to ring out loud and clear around the world, from the tip of Ireland, the tip of Malin to the top of Mizen Head and everywhere in between. It needs to ring around the corridors of Dáil Éireann, and it needs to ring around the Minister for Education, that our schools are not about producing employees for the economy, but about producing well-rounded, self-confident citizens for society. The system we have is not working, and it's not sufficient. Not for the staff, not for students, not for society. And it's not a system that needs to be improved, it's a system that needs to be transformed. Can our educational sector be brave and courageous and take up the mantle of creating a pioneering social model that puts the loving of staff and students before learning, that promotes the befriending of our complex inner worlds that are full of high mountains, deep valleys, and forests of the unknown, that embraces the challenging behaviours of staff and students, and through compassion and understanding creates sanctuaries where vulnerabilities can find expression and hidden weeping wounds can find true healing. Next year we commemorate the 100th-year anniversary of the Easter Rising, where the proclamation spoke of cherishing the children and people of the nation. Along with the commemoration, perhaps next year it needs to be the beginning of a new rising and transformation within our educational sector. Because if parenting is the most important profession in the world, and it surely is, then teaching and the art of teaching and teachers that love their jobs and love their students and love themselves is a very, very close second. It needs to be the most well-funded, well-supported, well-trained workforce in the whole country. We need the people to rise up and to champion again the status of the teaching profession and return it to that status that it once held in our society. Because it's not a raft of new initiatives that our teachers and principals need. They haven't come out their ears. It's investment in them as human beings, for they're the greatest asset that we possess in the educational sector. It's opportunities for them to come into the fullness of their being, which will allow them to be most effective, to be able to respond and meet the real needs of their fellow principals and staff and students. A new breed of warrior needs to emerge, warriors of the light that are willing to be brave and facing their own demons, so that their authentic light can shine. And in the words of Mandela, as you allow your own light to shine, so you give permission to others to do the same. And perhaps then the dream of Pearse and Clark and Connolly can no longer be a dream but a reality, that we truly cherish all of our people. And coming near the end, you'll be glad to know, but I just want you to think that, imagine in 20, 30 years' time you're walking down the street and some young person or some person comes to you and says, you know, I want to really thank you. You were a fantastic physics teacher, and through the knowledge you imparted to me, it allowed me to get a job and have a good living, and I just really want to thank you for that. And that would make you feel good, and rightly so. I wonder, as you walked on a bit further, and if another person approached you and said, you know, that at a time in their life when they didn't believe in themselves, when they felt worthless, when they maybe felt that life was not worth living, and when their outer persona masked their inner turmoil, that you believed in them, that you loved them unconditionally despite whatever behaviour it was that they're engaged in, and that the culture inside in your school helped to transform how they felt about themselves and helped them to come into harmony with their own voice, so that they became the sculptor of their life and not the sculpted. I wonder how might that make you feel. And I don't think, whenever the case will come, that you lie in your deathbed, I'm not too sure you'll ask yourself the question, I wonder how many scientists or electricians or doctors or engineers that I helped to produce. I don't think you'll judge your success as a person in the education sector by that. I think you'll judge it by how many people's inner light and star that you allow to shine. To finish with, Gautama Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, when trying to capture how short our lives really are, once said, "This existence of ours is as transient as autumn clouds. To watch the birth and death of human beings is like looking at the movements of a dance, a lifetime like a flash of lightning, rushing by like a torrent down a steep mountain." We've stopped on our cosmic journey to encounter each other, to meet, to love, to share. This is a precious moment, but it's temporary, as the life of our loved ones that have gone before us have so vividly shown. If we can embed emotional well-being, not alone as a fundamental part of our schools, but as a fundamental part of society, we'll ensure that more people will be able to come into harmony with their own true voices, and that our schools can be lanterns that can illuminate the path for those people that are in darkness to emerge from it into a world and a network of love and support. And then perhaps our moment and our time and our year together will have been worthwhile. None of us can walk another person's path for them, but we can certainly walk it with them, and we need to walk with each other. I wish you all the very, very best on your individual and our collective journey going forward. Thank you.